Hey guys, how have you all been? How are you doing in lockdown? I'm actually doing really good. I haven't had this much free time since like summer break when I was in high school, so this is nice. Even though I kinda miss going outside, especially when it's getting warm. But I've never felt this unmotivated to do anything since a long time. So anyways, I wanted to do something more chill today. I have here my Goodreads account on my phone. So I studied literature and linguistics for 3 years, and then I specialized in linguistics, so I basically had to read books for 3 years. In that period of time I read roughly 91 books. This is like a big overestimation. I haven't added all the books and short stories I had to read when I was studying, because I actually updated my Goodreads account like 2 years into my studies, so a lot of it is from memory. Also, I didn't read everything on this list. Yeah, this is roughly everything I had to read. Anyways, let's jump in. I'm going to start off. I have a couple of books here left. I studied in Dutch, which is my mother tongue, and in English. I'll be more specific about the English books because I think that's more interesting for an English audience. But yeah, the Dutch books were fun as well. The first book I had to read was Mother Tongue by Bill Bryson. This is the cover. I had to read this for my English Proficiency 1 course in my first year of college, and I remember my professor told me that it is like a funny book about the English language. I marked all the chapters and we basically just had to talk about this book in English. So I did some things with this book, but I don't remember anything about this. I didn't think this was funny at all. I mainly read this on the train. How college works in my country is more you go, or you are in your dorm from Monday till Friday, and then you go home on the weekend. So I mainly read this on the train back home or back to my dorm. I gave this 2 stars. I can rant about this professor for so long, but I think I'll keep this for the next video, because otherwise this will be way too long. Moving on, the next one is Light in August by Paul Faulkner. It just says Vintage Faulkner. I'm sorry, William Faulkner. I DNF'd this twice, which is weird. The same professor introduced us to this book club, and first year 18-year-old me, which is 6 years ago, what the heck, he introduced this book club and he was like, every month we read a book, I'm going to discuss it, it's a lot of fun. And I was really enthusiastic. I never was part of a book club. I actually still have never been part of a book club. But yeah, he was like, it's going to be so much fun, come on guys. And I was like, yeah. I went to like a bookstore, bought this book. It's horrible. I actually gave it 2 stars because I think there is some pleasure and meaning probably when you finish this, but this is horrible. I'm so sorry. What do I remember? It's about like a black guy that went to work in the mines. There's a house that caught on fire. There was an old woman in that house. Did she get rescued? I don't know anymore. There's something about a guy, and the entire chapter was very sad, and he was looking through a window, and I'm guessing everything will probably come together in the end, and you have a very nice closed off story, and I guess in the end you'll be like, whoa, that was really clever, now I want to read it again. But it was so boring. I think the black guy that worked in the mines, but don't quote me on that, people were being racist towards him, but he also had like this flashback of his like childhood years, and he was treated very badly by his dad. I barely remember anything, and it was a drag. I remember, so I actually had a hard time making friends back in college, or friends that also studied literature, but I remember some girls saying like, oh, this book was the worst, but after this book it got a lot better. But I never finished the first book, and I never wanted to continue on with any book club books ever. So yeah, that was way too long. Moving on, there's 2 more books. The Woman in the Dunes by, I don't know how to say this name, Abe Koko, and Chronicles of a Dead Foretold. I'll insert like pictures. They were the 2 next books for the book club, which I added on Goodreads back when I was 18 years old, but I never read them. Actually, Woman in the Dunes, from all the books on this list that I never read, I think that's the one that I think I would enjoy the most, but I don't know. Next up, we had English or history of English literature and history of Dutch literature, and I actually did a really good job like adding books chronologically. I really like medieval literature, which I think is an unpopular opinion, I don't know, but I like how we don't really have that many sources, and I think that literary researchers really want to see how literature expresses like those times and like the values they had and stuff like that. While like for example contemporary books, there's a study called close reading, which is just only the book or the story is its own world and we don't connect it to like the author of, or the times it has been written in and stuff. I don't like those approaches. I know that a lot of people in my literature class, I think they liked it, but I didn't. Which is why I like medieval literature more. Jesus, I'm so long-winded. There's a couple of books that I had to read. In English I had to read Sir Gawain and the Green Knight, which is a very popular, it's pretty well known. I gave it I gave it about 4 stars. I like it. I don't even know what the story was about anymore, to be honest. I think King Arthur came in it, but only in the intro. And then you had Sir Gawain and he went on a quest, and there also was a woman. That's my recollection of the story. In Dutch I had to read, this has an English title as well, it's very well known, but like Reinhard. I really don't know how to say Reinhard in English, but like the fox, Reinhard, the fox, which is like the story is very well known. It's the story about this fox that basically does a lot of shitty stuff to the other animals in the kingdom, so they go to the king to complain, and then you have like a bear and other animals that try to come and get him to, I think, stand trial for his crime, but he always finds a way to be more clever than them, and I think in the end he escapes. I don't know, I forgot how it ended actually. And weirdly enough, while I said I really like Sir Gawain, I absolutely hate that story, really. There's nothing redeemable about this. I hate Reinhard and maybe it's just my professors, but the way he was described was always like, oh, that clever fox, but I'm just like, I hate that guy. Poor animals. The entire animal kingdom is suffering because of him. Another book in Dutch was Karel and the Elegast, which, how do you say that in English? It's like King Karl and like a noble man? No, Google says elf spirit, but that's not entirely correct. And this is a good example of why I like medieval literature, I think, because so it's about King Karl that is graced with the presence of an angel that tells him to do stuff, and then he goes on this quest and he meets the Elegast, and like it's very predictable, but it also kind of reflects, for example, the very big influence of Christianity back in the day and stuff like that. How many? I gave that one 4 stars. Another Dutch one is Marieke van Nieuwegen, a miracle spell, which is Marieke van Nieuwegen is a name and then like a miracle play. I barely remember anything about this one as well. It's about this girl that makes a pact with the devil, but you can clearly see the Christian influences. I'm not even that big of a fan of like anything that has to do with religion or stuff. It's just, it was so prominent back in those days and you can see it reflecting in the books. I like it. The next one is Elkerlijk, which is, if I'm not mistaken, Everyman in English. And it's this poem that basically says that when you die, everyone's equal in the eyes of God. It's a poem, so I'm not going to say too much about this. Man, I have so many Dutch things. We're almost through the Dutch things. Next is Lucifer. I don't have a printed copy anymore. I don't think I ever had. That was a Dutch one and a medieval one that I hated. I scrapped that one from my memory entirely. I gave it 2 stars back in the day. I don't know why. I couldn't tell you what it's about to save my life. It's about Lucifer, so I guess it's about a fallen angel. The next one I also didn't really like. This is the last Dutch one for a while, but it's like the Spanish... How do you even say it? It's the Spaanse Brabander. I think I wrote an essay. This doesn't even have a summary on Goodreads. So, going back to English, I had... Oh my, I forgot the name of the class. Studies of Literature in English 1. We had to read 3 books, and I have all 3 here. Basically, the professor, every time she gave this course, she picked 3 new books. So basically for her, there was always 3 new books. She never did the same books over and over again. And it basically reflects their own time period. The first one is A Sentimental Journey by Lawrence Stern, and just look at the tabs on this one. I failed this class. I also failed the previous Dutch class. And I also failed History of Literature and English. No worries, my first year was horrible, but then I skyrocketed. I was like a very good pupil after that one. First year was just partying. Oh man. Just look at these notes. I put so much effort into this as well. I really didn't want to fail this one again. So, what's this about? This is supposed to be funny. There's nothing funny about it. What was an example is like... So, it's about a guy that tours through Europe to do this like smart rich people kind of vacation tour thing. But instead he just flirts with a bunch of women, which can kind of be depicted on the cover. He said purse, which obviously is a metaphor for the female genitalia. Nothing ever happens. An example of humor in this book is that he went to Calais in France, and then the next chapter he's still in Calais. But yeah, like stuff like that. It was not funny at all. I remember the professor asking our class, like, did anybody think this was funny? And just everyone in unity was like, no. Like, we just get insinuations that something sexual will probably happen. We never see it. I guess it's like a very posh version of like, it's funny because they're naked kind of stuff. I give that one 2 stars as well. Now, I think this is the only 5-star book in my entire university career, and it is Dracula by Bram Stoker. A lot of people don't like this book. I love it. This is like the first time I actually slowed down and enjoyed a book. But then like the deadline for my presentation came like halfway through, so I read the second half in like a day. The summary is that Dracula goes to Western Europe to drink blood of females, and then there's a bunch of guys that try to stop him. And also one girl. There's this one movie, I'll insert a picture, that's a very good like representation of what happens in the book in my mind. Oh, it's so good. I can make an entire video of this book, to be honest, really. To me personally, it has a lot of elements that I really like. It was gothic, it had like actual women. I don't think of any book that I have, except for like Marieke van Nieuweghe, because she was a woman. But I don't think there have been any like depictions of women as actual characters in the books that I've been talking about. So that was nice. It was like really gripping and exciting. And also, it is the style in which it was written is as if it's like written in a diary or a journal or a letter to someone. It's like written like a novel, but it is framed like parts of a diary and letters, and I really like this one. I'm trying to condense all my thoughts. Also, a fun part about this is that like the second part of the book, I think about here, that's still a book, here is a bunch of like essays of other people that we had to study, and one of them depicts the vagina as a hole with very sharp teeth displayed in Dracula, and it is crazy. Last one is Soul Tourist by Bernardine Evaristo. I like her. I actually saw her like in real life when she did slam poetry. I'm not sure anymore, it has been a while. There's this guy and then there's this woman. He goes on this soul searching trip through Europe, hence the title, and then he meets this woman who also goes to an inn with him. and he basically is trying to find like his ancestry and who he really is. And it's also about black culture. He sees like ghosts of his ancestors, and it was really interesting. I actually liked this book. I gave it 4 stars, and then she was like a cool, like I don't want to say it's haters to lovers, but it's more like haters and lovers. And the writing style was cool too. I think if I would recommend a book, I think this one would be liked the most by BookTube in general. But it also has like, you know, novel-like pages, but then it also had like poem-like, but then it has a bunch of like bullet points and like I love this so much. She used a variety of ways to convey her characters' emotions, and it was meaningful without it being like, I don't want to say overly complex, because complex things can be fun, but like pretentious. This is a good book, to be honest. Not as good as Dracula, but at least I know what I'm saying. With Dracula I can go on and on. Next I have a bunch of books that I didn't read, to be honest. We had a class called like History of European Literature, and it was actually just a dude. Okay, I have this rant in my head. I'll remove it from my head and I'll just save it for another video. But this dude pretended to give History of European Literature, but he actually gave Gushing Over Modernism in a course. We only saw modernist things, like I think interbellum period. I don't know anything about the history of literature in Europe, or at least that's what it feels like. But he gave us like a list of books that we could read if we wanted to, and then every class he discussed another book, and then basically we chose 3 books that we read, and we used those 3 books to frame what we learned in that class. This will go fast since I never read most of these. The first one is a title in Spanish. I don't speak Spanish, by Rosa Chasel. I'll insert a picture again. Actually this one sounded really interesting because it's like about a he and a she. It starts with his point of view, but throughout the book it changes into her point of view, or vice versa, it starts with her and ends with him. The concept sounds really interesting anyways. The second one is Fleur du Mal by Baudelaire. Oh, my head right now. Thinking in Dutch, I'm speaking in English, now I'm reading in French. It's a collection of poems, and that's the only thing I remember really, and it's originally in French. We have Hunger by Homsen Knut, or Knut Hamsun, and I also don't remember anything about that one. Everything is modernist. I feel like if I wanted to take the most important works of modernism class, that would be the perfect class, but it's a very, very flawed class about European or history of European literature. These are the books that I had to read. The next one is Zeno's Conscience by Italo Svevo, and again I don't know anything about them. The next one is The Wastelands by T.S. Eliot, which is like legendary, and I actually read that one and I hate it. I know for a fact that there's a lot in there to unpack, and it has a lot of meaning. And probably if I were to just like sit in my bed or at my desk and I spend the entire afternoon like reading it and surfing the internet and and thinking about them and all those things, I will probably like it. But the way it was presented to me is just, I saw that poem in 2 different classes, and it's just, my professors are gushing about this man, right? So they would read a sentence and they would be like, oh, and he means this thing, that's a fact, it's genius, moving on. And we take the rent, we put it away. I don't like it when my literature or any book that I had to read was presented to me as like, this is what the author means, I, the professor, think it is good or bad. and now we move on, and that's all the facts. Then we have the selected poems by Ossip Mandelstam. I don't even remember ever reading his name. We have a one in Dutch, which is translator Mr. Fisher's. Oh my god, I don't know this word in English. Mr. Fisher's hell travel. That's not like hellevaart. You know, when you travel to hell. It is a word in English, but I don't know what it is. Why does the internet give me hell travel? Harrowing of hell, descend into hell. No! I don't know what this is about either. Moving on. I'm so sorry. Next, I actually read a book, but I don't have it because a friend lent it to me. But it is To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. Probably one of the only modernist writers that I saw that I actually liked. If I remember correctly, To the Lighthouse didn't have a very overt plot, but what I really loved about it was that you saw different points of view of the family, and what she used was a technique called stream of consciousness. An example is when the mother is sitting at the table and she's looking at her family, and then we hear her thoughts and she's like, I'm so happy that my family is happy. Oh look, a pear, I feel like eating a pear. And then that same technique is used to travel through a bunch of points of view, and just the atmosphere that Virginia Woolf created was really nice. Next book is The Magnetic Fields by André Breton. I don't know, I didn't read it, I don't remember anything about it. The last book of this list is Endgame by Samuel Beckett. Beckett is another asshole that I don't like, I'm so sorry. I gave this 2 stars. I don't even think I finished it. It's about 2 guys that are sitting in their own trash cans. I think during a war or after a war, or like post-apocalyptic, or they think it's post-apocalyptic. It's very vague. I know that there were gay sexual undertones, or at least that was my interpretation, and that's everything I remember, and I think Samuel Beckett writes really boring stuff. One that I accidentally skipped was the Three Penny Opera by Bertolt Brecht, which I liked. I know, shocking. I gave this 4 stars actually. It's about this like criminal ring group, and one of them gets married. It's a script of a play. I remember reading this and liking it and thinking about like things I wanted to say about society and stuff like that. Another Dutch one, which I actually have in book form, is Max Havelaar by Multatuli. I think, if I'm not mistaken, then Multatuli was not the writer's real name. And this is hardcover and everything. The main takeaway was that this is a story in a story in a story in a story, and that a lot of people think it is boring. I fell asleep once when reading this, when I was not supposed to fall asleep, but I remember that I liked this more than most people in my class, including the professor, and I gave it 3 stars. It's really hard to tell what this is about, to be honest, but I think the overarching story was about a coffee salesman and something about Africa. Next we have Noodlot by Louis Couperus, and it's hard to translate in English, to be honest. It's like fate or destiny, but has a more doom-like connotation. I don't remember anything about this. I gave it 3 stars. I'm so confused. Did I like it? Why don't I remember? I'm trying to find like a good summary, but it's mostly just people bragging about the fact that they're like, it's like, or I am very smart on Reddit, but then in book reviews. An English one is The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn by Mark Twain, which is the sequel of Tom Sawyer. This one I actually DNF'd and I gave it 3 stars. It wasn't bad. It was just that by then, university really beat me down, okay? This book was too much. So I remember that it depicted racism pretty realistically, because it was about this kid and then his black friend that went on this like adventure thing, and then they met a bunch of people, and the people kind of built the worldview around them, if that makes sense. Okay, next we have this book called Het Dwaallicht by Willem Elschot, which literally translates to like a stray light in English, and I also have no recollection of this book whatsoever. And now I feel like I made an essay about a light in this book. That's a very me thing to do. Like, what should I write an essay about? I don't know, what's the title? Okay, let's go with that. I gave it 3 stars, so 3 stars is like the forgettable zone in my mind. Next I have Bind by Ferdinand Bordewijk, which this is a collection of 3 books, so it was really short. And I really liked that one actually. I gave it 4 stars. It's about it's pretty long actually. It's the longest one of the 3. This little, but it was about this teacher that taught like a really rebellious class of teenagers, and like there's a bunch of like side plots. They went on this like cycling day trip, and he also had this like romance type of thing. He calls his class the hell. I don't know, I don't remember why I liked it. I remember that the writing style was very straightforward, which I liked about it. It was such a breath of fresh air after, like, The Adventures of Huckleberry Finn can be very tedious in my opinion, and Max Havelaar as well. And then I had a history of European literature class, it was just bullshit. So I guess that's why I liked it. Next is Hamlet. Look at this, baby. This is a play by Shakespeare. Oh my god. That was probably the hardest exam I've ever had, honestly. I read the entire thing. Look, these are the parts of Shakespeare's play, and then all these are footnotes. And we had to read and learn the footnotes as well. This was Studies of Literature in English 3. He actually, the professor who gave this to us was a very old man who is definitely set in his ways. He only focused on Hamlet for some reason, and the summary of this class sounded very promising, because like we're going to focus on one book so that we can get a bunch of point of views of different types of literary studies. So like feminism, post-colonialism, postmodernism, modernist, so blah blah blah. That was a lie. This man, I either he's just so used to talking about Hamlet that that's the only thing he does, or he really loves Hamlet and that's why he only talks about Hamlet. But it was basically just his interpretation of Hamlet, and then we had like 4 pages of, by the way, T.S. Eliot said this. By the way, Virginia Woolf said this. By the way, this is the like short parts, and everything else was just him talking about the play. The worst part is that it's an 8 AM class and he doesn't like share his PowerPoints or anything, so you have to be there to know what he thinks is important. So if you don't know what Hamlet is about, me neither. Hamlet is about, you know what, there's a very good movie, and it actually uses Shakespeare's original play as the script, and it's really good. So if you ever need to read Hamlet, watch the movie instead, and it will be 10 times better. But yeah, next up is Mijn Kleine Oorlog by Louis Paul Boon, which translates to My Tiny War or My Little War. I gave it 4 stars, but I'm reading a summary and I have no recollection, but I gave it 4 stars, so apparently it used to be good. Next one. The next one is Sterkste by Cyril Buzz, or like translated in Dutch, in English it's The Law of the Strongest, and it is so over the top. There's this fight, I think it was in a bar between 2 people, and then the entire bar gets involved, and then the entire street gets involved, and everybody was just fighting each other. And it was supposed to like depict how horrible society is, but it was so over the top. Like, you're not gonna see an entire street like physically fighting each other because of a fight in a bar. It was so funny. It gets really sad towards the end, but I was just laughing my ass off. Nothing, like, it's supposed to be naturalistic, but there was nothing natural about it. It was really over the top. It was really sad. it is a really sad book, but it was so over the top that I thought it was hilarious. And I remember saying in class, like, this book is so funny. And the professor was just disturbed. Like, not even black humor funny, just how does this writer take himself seriously funny. Like, I gave it 4 stars. Next one is called Houtekiet, which is a Dutch name by Gerard Walschap, and again I have no recollection of this story in my head. Next I had English Proficiency 2. We take the rant and we put it away. We had to read a bunch of short stories, and then every other week we had to make a presentation about them. So it was a lot of work. So it starts really normal, but the more we read, the more complex and weird the stories got. And these are out of order, but I remember The Melody of Dead by Marguerite Duras was the last one we had to read, and it's about this man that pays this woman to spend time with him in a room. Most of these short stories were okay. I gave that one 3 stars. There was this one called A Temporary Matter, and I don't remember what it's about. The Purloined Letter by Edgar Allan Poe was the first one, and then the professor gave like this example presentation, and it was so complex and far-fetched that the entire class was just like, we're supposed to replicate this. But it's about like detectives that have to do something with a letter. I think they have to find it. It was okay. I gave it 3 stars. The next short story was by Haruki Murakami, which most people really like this writer. The Second Bakery Attack was its name. And it's about this man and this woman who wake up in the middle of the night very hungry, and then they go order a bunch of McDonald's, and they have this entire realization thing. I actually liked it. I gave it 4 stars. I remember that we had a girl in class who was a really big fan of Murakami, and she gave an amazing presentation. And next we had The Swimmer by John Cheever, and it's about this man that goes on his entire journey. I actually had to make a presentation on that week, and I thought that the man had actually died. So he basically was a ghost, like reliving his past. I don't know if my professor agreed with me, but so like he swam through like a bunch of like images and symbolism and memories. Next one, ooh, this is a really good story actually. I gave it 3 stars, but in retrospect it probably deserves more. But it's Beginners by Raymond Carver, and it's about like 4 people who talk about love. What's interesting about it is that there's a couple that's clearly not that doing so great love-wise, but then the man in the couple tells this really beautiful story about love. Like the entire takeaway was like, how do we really understand love, and how do we know what true love is and stuff like that. It was great. Next we have The Royal Game by Stefan Zweig. If I am not mistaken, this was about chess. I had to say something about this short story on my exam, and I take the rent and I put it away. We have Kafka. Franz Kafka's The Penal Colony, which is about this torturing device, and I didn't like it. I gave it 2 stars and I moved on. Then we have The Dead by James Joyce. So it's about basically just this upper class family that comes together. You have like a couple of like family issues that do or do not get resolved. And I remember my professor saying that like the entire family actually was dead all along, and I just like refused to believe it. I was like, no, James Joyce is trolling us. Everyone's doing fine, and he just called his book The Dead, or like a short story, he called it The Dead because he wanted to troll us. I don't know. I think that looking back, I might have been wrong, but I was so done with him. It's a perfectly fine story, and you could genuinely argue that there is no symbolism behind it whatsoever. Next we have Blow Up and Other Stories by Julio Cortázar, which I gave 3 stories, and it's about this man who takes a picture and then he sees something criminal happening. Was it a theft or something? I remember that I interpreted it wrong. Next we have Company by Samuel Beckett, and I don't like Beckett, so most of these short stories are good. Like if you feel like reading a short story, you could definitely take one of these, but just I hated this one. I read it twice and I didn't know what it was about, and I hated it. I didn't add all these short stories because I couldn't find them all. I have a couple more in Dutch. I think this was History of Dutch Literature 3 by now. So Werther Nieland by Gerard Drijven Werther Niel is a name. It's about this sociopathic kid who tortures animals, and he constantly wants to start clubs and like instill rules and stuff. And I thought it was really interesting how like a really not great kid was portrayed so realistically. But that's about it that I liked, so I gave it 3 stars, but it was okay. Next day I actually have a physical copy for a change. Look at this tiny one. This is called Het Behouden Huis by Willem Frederik Hermans, which why do Dutch authors pick such difficult names? It's translated as like the preserved house. It's about a man who, or like a soldier. It's an interesting little book actually. It's about a soldier who finds this house. It's in like a perfect state, and did he murder the inhabitants or did he just live there? Anyway, he pretends to be the owner of the house. And I don't want to spoil it, but I remember the ending actually really stuck with me. I gave it 3 stars because it's not that interesting, but it's not bad at all. Next we have De Zaak 4061 by Harry Mulisch, which translates to The Case 4061, which is about this like higher up Nazi military person who gets convicted in I think 61 because of the title. The premise is interesting because by that time basically an entire generation has passed and people have been more like in a forgiving mindset again. And then he's a reporter who reports on the case, but it was just written so bad and it was so boring, and there's like a bunch of details that don't matter, and the entire premise of like how things have shifted and stuff, it isn't even portrayed that well. I gave this 1 star. This is the first 1 star actually. Next we have De Verwondering by Hugo Claus, and Hugo Claus is, I would say, of all the Dutch authors, the most well-known one. Sadly enough, his books sucked. My Dutch history professor was absolutely crazy and a very weird man. And this was like his favorite book and he read it like almost every year. So I automatically hated it. And it is about this teacher who goes on a journey with his boy. Like again, the premise is good, but it's just written so badly. And that's what I don't like about literature oftentimes. Just because it is written in a fancy way doesn't make it good. I feel like people who get it feel smart, but it doesn't make it good. I mean, some of my professors really love that they have to work to understand the meaning of a book, but I think it is oftentimes just pretentious. The next one is Blinde Gedichten by Delphine Leconte, which is translated into Blind Poems, and I had to do like a group presentation about this bundle of poems. And it's cool because it was just about like her life and it was very unapologetic, and I actually liked it. I gave it 4 stars. Then we have English literature for the same old man who gave Hamlet. His specialization is American plays in the 20th century, if I'm not mistaken. So his entire class was about American plays, and we had to read the scripts of a lot of them, and I read absolutely 0. So a couple. We have Long Day's Journey into Night by Eugene O'Neill. We have A View from the Bridge by Arthur Miller. We have A Streetcar Named Desire by Tennessee Williams. We have Buried Child by Sam Shepard. American Buffalo by David Mamet. Children's Hour by Lillian Hellman. Our Town by Tormund Wilder. A Raisin in the Sun by Lorianne Hansberry. Who is Afraid of Virginia Woolf by Edward Albee. The Yellow Wallpaper by Charlotte Perkins Gilman. The Piano Lesson by August Wilson. And Angels in America by Tony Kushner. Jeez, what do I remember is A Raisin in the Sun was about black people, because raisin in the sun is a metaphor for their skin when it travels up in the sun, which I thought was kind of weird. And it was a question on my exam and I couldn't answer it. Angels in America is surprisingly good apparently, but I never read it. But it's about like sex and drugs and rock and roll. Anyways, we only saw like 6 of them, and then we saw a bunch of classes about like Broadway and stuff like that. And then the others we just had to like read and analyze on our own, which, I mean, it was a 3rd year of us in university, so we could do that. But it's kind of a dick move to do, and I'm taking my rent and I'm putting it away. English literature 2 was focused on Black People in America. We saw Life in the Iron Mills by Rebecca Harding Davis. The only thing I really remember was that it was about a bunch of poor people. And if I'm not mistaken, the takeaway in class was, this is how poor black people used to be in America in those times. The next book is From Slavery by Booker T. Washington. It's about this black guy who made it and who argued that you have to just be very white in your mindset. Went from being a slave to like founding one of the most important schools in America, and he argued that you just had to let go of your black ancestry, while the souls of black people actually protested that way of thinking, and he was more for like rights of all black people. Then I had to read Daisy Miller by Henry James, which is not about black people at all. It was like the exception. I remember that I read this and I used to like it. I thought it was really pretty, but I don't remember anything about it. Sorry. Then I read De Metsier, also by Hugo Claus, and if I'm not mistaken, I actually used that one to compare to De Verwondering, to just see how far he had come. I remember that I forgot to add a bunch of books because I did it from memory, and then later on like they came to me. So some more medieval stories that I read was The Dream of the Rood, Beowulf. I really like Beowulf actually. The Canterbury Tales, which is about like a bunch of people traveling. In History of English 2, I also read a bunch of books that I didn't like. The Second Coming by W.B. Yeats. I don't even remember reading this. Oh yeah, it's a poem. I had to read Ulysses by James Joyce. The only time you want to read this book is when you want to torture yourself. I really don't get how this has such a big fandom around it. It has no punctuation whatsoever. Like just no punctuation. And it can be very funny, right? Because there was the sentence, you think that's where the sentence should end, but then you notice that it goes on for a little bit and then, oh, it's a sexual innuendo. There is an overarching story, but it is so hard to just read the damn thing that I gave it 1 star, and I'm absolutely against everyone who likes this. I also read Waiting for Godot, which is also a play by Samuel Beckett. It's about people that are waiting for Godot and a lot of stuff happens and I don't like it. I also had to read the intro for Professions for Women by Virginia Woolf when we discussed feminism. I remember that she was quite important. I think she founded her own publishing company because nobody wanted to publish her. So I like her. We also had to read Odor of Chrysanthemums. I'm an English major. Musée des Beaux-Arts, which is in English, it means Museum of Fine Arts. That by Landscape by Margaret Atwood. I think I also only had to read the intro. The Prophet's Hair. It's so sad. I don't remember most of these because I just read them, and then in class, if the professor asked the question, I made sure I could answer, but then it just vanished from my memory forever. One that I do remember is The Notorious Jumping Frog by Mark Twain. It's about this story of a jumping frog, and I remember that I just had a lot of fun reading it. Mark Twain is a really okay author, in my opinion. He was very extravagant as well. One that I remember a little bit better is To Build a Fire by Jack London, which is a naturalist short story about this man that tries to survive in a very cold climate. And the same kind of story is presented in The Snows of Kilimanjaro and other stories, but I just read The Snows of Kilimanjaro by Ernest Hemingway. I also like that. I kind of like naturalistic stories. Like anything that's about like fighting to survive really grips me, usually from like the first page. I also had to read Barn Burning from William Faulkner. I gave it 3 stars. It was about his family and his small boy, and eventually he burns the barn, I think, but that's just because I read the title and I remember the family was struggling, and it was really immersive. So the last 4 books, or I think these are poems. These were post-colonial, but I don't have any recollection of reading them. I know that I did, but I don't remember. Howl by Allen Ginsberg. Some poems by Toni Morrison. Lady Lazarus by Sylvia Plath, which I remember the name, but I don't know what it's about anymore. And How to Tame a Wild Song by Gloria E. Anzaldua. I don't know if I pronounced it correctly. And if I'm not mistaken, because it doesn't have a summary, this one is like about an Irish woman who wants to preserve her Irishness. These last four are post-colonial, if I'm not mistaken, but we were the end of the semester, so I was just happy that I actually read them. It's so sad, actually. In conclusion, I am going to do a video of just ranting about studying literature. Those were all the books and short stories and poems I had to read. I hope you like this video. I hope it won't be too tedious. I'll try to cut it down as much as possible. But thank you all for watching. If you study literature, I would love to know what you actually read, so please tell me. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.